Every year, some food product takes the leading position in terms of the number of questions I get asked. One year it was oatmeal pancakes, another year it was cottage cheese, and so on. This year it's eggs. Should you eat eggs or not? Is it better to have them in your diet or better not to? How many can you eat? Which eggs are better? Which are worse? It's a torturous question, and let's figure out once and for all whether you should eat them or not. One of my acquaintances eats 2 dozen eggs a week because he works out, but he says they affect cholesterol, so he eats 1 dozen with yolks and the other dozen without. Another acquaintance of mine doesn't eat eggs at all and says he just doesn't like the taste, though he'll have 1 or 2 a week. So is it healthy or harmful? Are there perhaps any studies on this topic? Let's dive in. So, are eggs a superfood or a hidden threat? It turns out that everything depends on context. For example, for women after menopause, eggs can actually become a factor that contributes to unwanted weight gain, especially when combined with a typical standard American diet. This is a vivid example of how a seemingly universally healthy product, depending on the conditions we place it in and what diet it's part of, can have both beneficial and harmful properties. A study was recently published showing that, for instance, in women who have already gone through menopause, higher egg consumption is associated with weight gain. Who would have thought? Eggs and excess weight. It seems like protein. How does this contribute to weight gain? It turns out that the key factor that makes eggs more beneficial versus harmful is the type of diet. The greatest risk is among those who follow the standard American diet, which includes lots of processed meat, refined grains, sweets, and fast food. In that context, eggs can cause harm, but without all that, they'll be beneficial. Why is this important? Because in principle, this completely changes our understanding of dieting. It changes the entire nutritional narrative because eggs were demonized for decades due to their cholesterol content. Then there was some reconsideration and they were rehabilitated as a superfood, and now we're viewing them through the lens of metabolic context. For example, after menopause, estrogen levels drop, which previously played a protective role in fat metabolism and protected against increased insulin sensitivity. In these new conditions, the saturated fat from eggs and choline are absorbed differently and affect the body in other ways. Few people know that the color of the shell and yolk, a common question actually, isn't an indicator of the egg's nutritional value. The shell color basically depends on the breed. For example, white leghorns and Rhode Island Reds. They lay eggs differently, and the shell color varies by chicken breed, not by the nutrients they contain. So whether you buy white or brown eggs doesn't actually matter. It depends on the chicken breed. As for an orange yolk, people say it's healthier, though in reality there can be healthy eggs with pale yolks too. That color only indicates that the chicken was fed food rich in carotenoids, particularly vitamin A. Usually such feed contains lots of marigold petals or corn, and then the eggs come out with a more yellow yolk. We habitually think they're probably healthier because they're brighter, but the nutritional value in terms of protein and fats is practically identical. Overall, it must be said that eggs are essentially the gold standard of bioavailable protein. Egg protein has an ideal amino acid profile and is absorbed by the body at 97–98%. It serves as the gold standard. All other types of protein are compared to egg protein. Such indicators are even better than protein from meat or straight-up whey protein. One large egg gives us on average 6 to 7 grams of high-quality protein. But actually, from a nutritional standpoint, eggs are one of the most controversial products because on one hand, they have high-quality protein, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin B12, more vitamin A in the yolks, antioxidants, lutein, and zeaxanthin, which are very beneficial for the eyes, by the way. On the other hand, there's the yolk, and the yolk contains cholesterol and choline. For a long time, this was considered exclusively harmful. But modern research shows that, in principle, dietary cholesterol that we consume doesn't necessarily strongly affect blood cholesterol levels. In 70% of people, dietary cholesterol has practically no effect on blood cholesterol levels. Interesting but true. Modern research shows that for most people, saturated fats and trans fats from foods we eat together with eggs, for example, a classic American breakfast with bacon, sausage, butter, along with eggs, these other trans fats and saturated fats affect bad cholesterol from low-density lipoproteins more than the cholesterol from yolks themselves. But there are 30% of people, so-called hyperresponders, who react very strongly to dietary cholesterol. For them, cholesterol levels spike from eggs. Fortunately, this can be checked. But let's add to this. Besides that, eggs are one of the best sources of choline. And choline is catastrophically lacking in the modern diet. One yolk contains approximately 150 milligrams of choline, which covers a third of the daily requirement. Choline is extremely important for brain health because acetylcholine is synthesized from it, the neurotransmitter responsible for memory. For the liver, choline is important because it prevents the development of fatty liver disease, that same condition affecting the livers of over 100 million Americans. Choline is also important for the normal development of the neural tube in the fetus during pregnancy. That's why choline and vitamin B9, folic acid, are added to prenatal vitamins. So choline deficiency is a widespread problem, and eggs allow you to solve it fairly quickly. Additionally, many people don't know this, but when a chicken lays an egg, that egg is covered with an almost invisible protein lipid film. Not the membrane inside the egg, but the film on the outside. This film prevents bacteria from getting inside the egg through pores in the shell. If you wash the egg with hot water, this coating that feels kind of slimy, that's the invisible protein lipid film. It gets washed away. That's why it's very important to wash eggs immediately before cooking, not in advance, and to store them in a closed container in the refrigerator. Then the eggs are protected from microbes, including salmonella. But there's also data regarding eggs and diabetes. These findings were actually contradictory. Many studies show that frequent egg consumption, 2 a day, is associated with a greater risk of type 2 diabetes. But at the same time, other studies show that if you eat 2 eggs a day on a low-carb diet, eggs actually improve insulin sensitivity. So what matters more isn't how many eggs you ate, but how many carbohydrates and sweets came with them. Depending on the amount of carbs, if there are many carbs, eggs may not be very good and increase diabetes risk. But if there are few carbs, eggs can be quite beneficial and reduce diabetes risks. The first part of recommendations is as follows. For most healthy people, 1-2 eggs per day is a safe and nutritious part of a properly balanced diet. But the key is the cooking method. It's preferable to boil them soft-boiled, hard-boiled, poached, or make an omelet rather than frying them in oil, especially butter or frying with bacon. For women in postmenopause, it's worth being moderate and cutting the number of eggs in half, maybe half a dozen per week, 3 to 5, and definitely combine them with vegetables and whole grains. Absolutely not with meat and white bread. And of course, you need to monitor weight and waist circumference if eating more eggs. But the risk group includes people who already have type 2 diabetes, or people who already have heart problems, or those with heightened sensitivity to cholesterol, meaning those whose cholesterol fluctuates or is already high. For them, it's more important not to exceed 3 to 4, maximum 5 yolks per week, but additional egg whites can be added. In the end, eggs aren't simply healthy or harmful. It's important to understand that they're a concentrated set of nutrients, and the effects from them unfold depending on what we combine them with. With other fats or sugar, that's harmful. With vegetables, that's beneficial. A journal called Clinical Nutrition conducted research, including studies on women. There were 4,500 participants, and they were observed for nearly a decade, tracking all dietary changes and how they affected weight. It turned out that if women in postmenopause eat 2 more eggs per week, they gain 1.5 to 2 pounds more than those who reduce egg consumption. This is a very important point. So if a woman has reached that certain age, maybe it's better to remove 2 eggs per week rather than add them. Although it depends on how you look at it. But overall, we now understand that this connection only matters for those who follow the standard American diet. Eating lots of meat, lots of fried food, lots of sweets. But those who eat less of that, maintain some limit on meat. Once or twice a week, fry less, boil or bake more, and don't eat too many sweets. For them, eggs acquire beneficial properties. But genetic predisposition, as abstract as this may sound right now, is very significant. But there's good news. We can determine genetic predisposition today and not just vaguely attribute everything to genetics. So we can know exactly for whom eggs will be beneficial and for whom harmful. But weight gain itself is primarily connected to cholesterol and choline contained in the yolk. So whether eggs are the enemy due to cholesterol or not, modern research says context matters. If along with eggs we also eat a lot of saturated fats in our diet, then it's harmful. If we don't eat more saturated fats, then even cholesterol from eggs is a perfectly normal thing and doesn't have much effect. So 2 eggs a day is normal, but in combination with a diet low in saturated fats. And then it can even lower bad cholesterol levels compared to a diet that contains both eggs and is rich in saturated fats. As for recommendations for healthy people from the Mayo Clinic, the leading organization, it's up to 12 per week. For women in postmenopause, based on results of new research, individual characteristics and genetics need to be considered and possibly having the norm, meaning 5 eggs per week. But still, we remember that while there may be a lot of cholesterol, the lion's share of beneficial substances includes vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, B12, choline, necessary for the brain, lutein and zeaxanthin, beneficial for vision. So you shouldn't completely give up eggs, although there was previously a concern that choline from eggs, with the help of intestinal bacteria, can convert into a potentially harmful substance called trimethylamine N-oxide, or TMAO. But this depends on the state of the microbiome. So if your microbiome is in bad shape, maybe it's better to hold off on eggs or stick to half a dozen, 5 eggs per week. But if your microbiome is fine, 2 eggs a day don't raise TMAO levels and don't change the microbiome composition in the short term and probably not in the long term either. But if we combine this with other products, both the microbiome suffers and harm from eggs appears. So the practical conclusions are, first, context decides everything. For a woman in menopause, a couple of eggs for breakfast with avocado and whole grain toast is beneficial. But those same eggs with bacon, potatoes, and a sweet roll are harmful. So consume eggs as part of a balanced diet with vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. And watch the total number of calories, because metabolism doesn't slow down with age, but we slow down and start moving more slowly. So adding physical activity allows us to adapt to a regular diet with regular calorie content without reducing it. Next, consider the cooking method, because boiled, poached, and omelet are preferable to those fried in oil, especially butter. Consider your own characteristics. If you have thyroid problems or rapid weight gain, maybe it's better to hold off on eggs. And of course, don't combine them with processed foods. But overall, 1 egg is just 70-80 calories. So if we increase egg consumption, we're unlikely to go over on calories. The cooking method is significantly more important. But the satiety effect that eggs provide allows us to eat less of other food. And that's definitely advantageous from all angles. Genetics, of course, matters, and we know that different people can metabolize food products differently. The PNPLA3 gene is responsible for fat accumulation and is also very important for egg metabolism. There are people whose PNPLA3 gene is broken. They can gain extra pounds even from eggs, but people whose PNPLA3 gene is in order can eat eggs in large quantities and not gain weight. So if you're really into it, you can check your genetics, take a genetic test, and determine how many eggs you can eat. But overall, eggs themselves are not dangerous. What's important is the right context and combining them with the right products. I'm very curious. How do you feel about eggs? How many eggs do you eat? And what's your overall well-being like? Have you noticed weight gain from eggs, or haven't you? Or maybe you eat eggs without fat. What's your cholesterol like? And that's a wrap for today. Take care and see you next time.